To get started, my name is Leah Wen. I'm really honored to co-host this Global Mental Health Speaker Series with the Population Health Initiative. Taylor, thanks for being here and helping us get everything set in the room. I'm really excited to have Emma Elliott and Mike Spencer here today. Emma is an assistant professor in the School of Education, or College of Education and Learning Sciences and Human Development. And Mike Spencer is the Ballmer Endowed Dean and Professor at the School of Social Work. So really delighted to have them here in conversation about Indigenous foodways and how they support mental health and overall health and well-being. And I'm just going to do a little land acknowledgement. We acknowledge the Coast Salish peoples of this land, the land which touches the shared waters of all the tribes and bands within the Suquamish, Tulalip, and Muckleshoot nations. And I acknowledge my connection to this place that is including my connection to the berries, the salmon, all the foods that have nourished me throughout my life. And in many ways, like my heart, my soul, everything, my body, and given me my health and my learning from the land and the plants and the lake that I live near is made possible by the Indigenous people of this land who continue to steward it and have through millennia. So thank you to the land, and thank you to Mike and Emma for being here. And I'm going to forward to the opening slide and hand it over to Emma to do a little bit more in-depth introduction of herself.
Yeah, so I'll introduce myself and then Mike will introduce himself and then we'll go into it. Hait squel siam net siaya, tlam ut siatala, hait sapka, ni alt metst atana quail, yath ut hakwashta, nut zamash wallowin, hait sapka. I give thanks to each and every one of you for being here today and to all of you for joining us online. My name is Emma Elliott and I'm from Cowichan Tribes on Vancouver Island, British Columbia. I'm also an associate professor. Everybody, I forgot to update my webpage. As it turns out, it's a DIY situation. But yes, I'm an associate professor in the College of Education. And my work initially started by thinking about perspectives of suicide in my home community and has unfolded since then because people in the community were sharing their perspectives related to colonization and the impact of colonization on our everyday lives, that it's now unfolded into how do we address these fractures in these relationships that are making it so that some people are thinking about wishing to die by suicide. And all in all, the bigger perspective was we had to repair these relationships. And that's what we're here to talk about. How do we repair our relationships in Indigenous food systems, and what does this have to do with Indigenous and or all of our health and well-being? Thank you all for having us.
That's loud. Hi everyone, Mike Spencer. I'm Native Hawaiian and mixed race. I'm originally from Honolulu, Hawaii. I grew up there and left Hawaii probably in my early 20s. I think I was 20 years old or so. It's been up here on the continent ever since. I'm a graduate of UW. And then once I finished my degree here, I spent 20 some years in Michigan, primarily working in the city of Detroit with African Americans and Latinos around, mostly around community health worker interventions, preventing diabetes, but also doing it in a culturally acceptable, culturally grounded way. I moved here about 7 years ago. Yeah, I think it's 7 now. Wow, that's a long time. It's almost to the point now I've definitely lived away longer than I've lived in Hawaii, but it's almost getting to the point where I've lived here almost as long as anywhere else. But I came here originally to do research, to really go back to my roots and do work in Hawaii with my Native Hawaiian communities and Native Hawaiian Pacific Island communities on the continent. I'm still getting to do some of that work, fortunately, but being the dean now, I have a lot more administrative responsibilities, so I'm less engaged in research today, but most of the work that I choose to be involved in has to do with really trying to raise the well-being of Native Hawaiian Pacific Island communities, both here and abroad, and I try to do it through culturally grounded, community-based participatory methods.
And also, this mic is on, right? Everybody good? Okay. So we're going to share a conversation today. I actually want to go back and talk about the image that you see on both my shirt as well as the image that you see here. In 1973, my dad and others built a traditional fishing weir across the river just below my mom's house. And this was in opposition to the government, who said that we couldn't fish for sustenance, and was happening at the same time as the fishing wars that were happening here in Washington state. And so now, as a result of the work that they did and the activism that they did during that time period, our community still has access to fishing for sustenance, including our own tribal hatchery. And so this was the rallying cry back in 1973 when this was taking place. And some of these images and stories are at the Royal BC Museum in Victoria. Thank you. So to get us started, I want to give a brief overview of Indigenous intellectual traditions or Indigenous knowledge systems. To be Indigenous means to be born of a place and to be in good relation with the place where one is born. And for Indigenous people, this means that our knowledges have emerged from the land itself. And so when I say Indigenous knowledges, I'm talking about the thousands and thousands of Indigenous knowledges all around the world that center on how interdependent and how interconnected we are, not just as human beings, but also with our plant and animal relatives and our ancestral relatives, and how interconnected all of these things are for really the existence of all living beings. So when I think about Indigenous knowledge systems and how these knowledge systems inform who we think we are in the world, that has something to say about the nature of being, that's ontology, but it also informs how we move about in the world and what these assumptions about who we think we are impact our actions, our choices, and our everyday experiences, including the way that we experience the world emotionally and in terms of physical health, intellectual health, etc. So we will be talking on individual, family, and community levels, but these same kinds of conversations that we're talking about need to also be happening on the global and international levels. When we go to this sustainable development goals and these kinds of things, for example, we're not meeting any of them, right? And we're talking about the kinds of ways that we think who we think we are in the world, right? Do we think that we're people who need to grow and produce and be individual? Or do we think that we're people who are interdependent and interconnected and don't exist without water or land or air, right? This is an evolutionary reality. It's not just an Indigenous knowledge system. So next slide. So when we think about what these kinds of understandings about who we are in the world offer, Indigenous relationality and the ways that we think about how we're moving about in the world they're all integrated into embodied everyday sociocultural practice. If you ask my mom, who's sitting here singing for us on the right-hand side, what is culture? She would look at you and say, it's not culture. This is the way that we live our everyday lives. This is who we are as Hwamuk people. So what we're saying here is this understanding of this relational ontological understanding is actually something that we all of us, as all human beings, need to begin thinking more deeply about. And we think that Indigenous knowledge systems, because it's co-constructed in relation to the land, which offers consent and reciprocity, agency and sustenance and renewal. We know that these knowledge systems, which also Indigenous people steward 85% of the living ecosystems. That's not by chance. That's by design. Right? That's our responsibility about who we are in our core, is to understand that nothing matters more than this regeneration and this sustenance in relation to who we are as people. Next slide. And so we do this through lots of different ways, through engaged and hands-on learning, through community-based practices, through oral storytelling. And today we're going to be sharing some stories from our communities that tell you a little bit of, that can tell us and shed light on and uncover some kinds of pathways to relational well-being. When we go to the College of Education and we start thinking about what do we want our kids to know and how do we want them to know it, we have really good ideas about this, but we're not really going after the right kinds of things. And we're talking about metrics that understand educating for human existence, metrics that talk about educating for relational well-being and interconnected well-being. We can go to Vivek Murthy, the previous Surgeon General who wrote the call for social connect. And on every single level, he has so many great ideas. And we can extend that call by including socio-ecological futures, necessarily so. Because I read the IPCC reports, the International Partnerships on Climate Change. I know what some of these metrics and markers are on global scales, and we're not even close. That doesn't sound like a good future for us, our children, or for our generations. But remember, we have knowledge systems that can protect and renew and sustain these living systems as relationships. We've been doing this for thousands and thousands of years. So what we handed out at the beginning as you came in is a triangular pyramid. And this is a pyramid that talks about the kinds of things, or at least identifies briefly. I'll talk about that in just a sec. Identifies briefly some teaching and learning aspects and some healing aspects. When I was wondering, how do I address suicide in my home community? My mom said, we sit and we eat together. So let's wonder together, what is it that's taking place when we're doing everyday sociocultural interaction, when we're participating in the ways and rhythms of our own local communities, when we're regenerating life by growing and thinking about the fundamental needs of human beings, the physical, right? What do we need? We need food, we need shelter, and we need safety. That's step number one. And we're not even close on all those metrics. Remember, it's getting worse. The rich are getting richer and the poor are getting poorer. So we can think about ways that some of these practices offer teaching and learning, offer healing, offer opportunities for regeneration. We can think about the how. Mike's going to share some stories about his community and the work that they've been doing to generate food for their communities and the other kinds of healing and learning experiences that are taking place by nature of locating it within the community and centering it on the knowledges of the people. Take it away, Mike. Oh, actually, before he goes, can I set this slide up?
Yeah.
Thank you so much. So on your piece of paper in front of you, here are some questions for you to think about. What is it that Indigenous food systems can offer learning, healing, and well-being? What do they have to offer health sciences? What do they have to offer mental health and clinical psychology? How do these examples show us what relational well-being or even a metric of relational well-being might look like? What does relational well-being in right and true and beautiful relations with the land and the water and the cultural practices of the people have to do with sustenance? And how do these things teach us about the purpose of health and education? And we're saying that we think we need to redo the entire fundamental purpose of health and education so that we could educate and heal toward human livelihoods on Earth, rather than educating toward extinction. Thank you, Mike.
All right. Well, thanks so much, Emma, and thanks everybody for being here. Um, Seeing your pictures and hearing about the Sand reminds me of my trip. I was one of my first things I did when I moved to Seattle was spend some time with Emma and her family, and checked out the Cowichan tribe area. Saw this hatchery, amazing hatchery, and just to know where it started, it's just amazing. Um, and I could go on forever with stories like that, you know, I mean, we have so many stories like that. Um, but today I'm just gonna focus on one project that it's still going on. I've been less involved with it, but it's a project that one of the reasons why I got connected to Emma was because of the work that we were doing around aquaponics systems in Hawaii. Before I talk about the project, I just want to sort of talk a little bit about sort of the process of how I do research and how this research was done. We utilize decolonizing and both culturally grounded approaches and practices to research. And when we do this, we not only center around the practices, values and norms of the community, deconstruct, challenge stereotypical messages that people may hold, connect individuals with their roots, explore what members not only have in common in terms of their past, their present, but also their dreams for the future. We help members become aware of their identity in the context of their own cultural background and their connection to their experiences of colonization and oppression. And then providing resources from the culture that can be used creatively, but also respectfully to support the work. So next slide, I'll talk about the Malama project. Malama is a word. Malama actually means to care for, to take care of. And it's also an acronym in this case, the Mini Ahupua'a for Lifestyle and Mea'ai Aquaponics. Just a couple of words that I'll explain, and we'll talk about Ahupua'a in a second. But Mea'ai is a Hawaiian word for healthy foods. So the Malama project was sort of rooted in this technology called aquaponics. How many of you have heard of aquaponics? Some of you, yeah. So and we did go and see some of the aquaponics going on up in Cowichan too, which was cool to check out. Yeah. And we were also looking at some of the ways in which backyard aquaponic systems might be used up there and how it might be different and what we have to, things we have to take into consideration. So in Hawaii, we're lucky we have good weather, so we don't need to heat the water or anything. We just put it in our backyard. We put these tanks in our backyard with typically a bed filled with lava rock and soil from which we grow our food, and fish poop that gets pumped out and gets filtered through the lava rocks and filters back into the water as clean water, takes all the ammonia out and nitrites out and gives it to the plants. So it's an efficient system. It's a self-sustaining system. It really doesn't use that much water. Evaporation is actually quite low. It also is a great way of not just sourcing food, but sourcing organic, healthy food. Provides not just plants and vegetables, but also protein in the form of fish. In this case, we use tilapia because it's a hardy fish in Hawaii, and yeah, it's pretty yummy. Not quite as good as salmon, but it's easy to grow. They multiply very fast and they're very hardy. And so and this system obviously is not a traditional native Hawaiian system. This is a modern technologies. But if you go to the next slide, what we do is we really we use metaphors to think of our aquaponic system as a mini ahupua'a. And an ahupua'a is the land that stretches from the top of the mountains to the first reef. Okay, and so, essentially a neighborhood. If you were to think of it that, in a certain way, and that's how we defined our neighborhoods, from the tip of the highest mountain to the first reef. And why do we do that? Because within that ahupua'a, everything for you can be provided within that ahupua'a, from fish to seaweed to fresh water that flows from the streams of that water, the garden, produce kalo and all kinds of other foods. So we use this as a metaphor. And so we think of our little aquaponic systems as mini ahupua'as. And the work that we did was in a community called Waimanalo, and you can see where the star is on the island of Oahu. That community is approximately 50% Native Hawaiian. So it's a pretty highly concentrated area. We don't have reservations per se in Hawaii. We're not a federally recognized tribe, but we're a recognized people. And so we have something called Hawaiian homelands, which is somewhat similar to reservations, but different. People, Native folks who come to Hawaiian homes say, wow, there is. And like that, yeah, kind of, kind of. Next slide. So in addition to, there's several principles behind this aquaponics. One of the principles is that we're not building aquaponics systems for ourselves. We build together. So if we were to build aquaponics in this room, we would all help each other build our aquaponics systems together. You wouldn't be building your system while I build my system. We would be building our systems together, and we would make enough systems so that everybody has a system. In this kind of a community, we involve our kids, we involve elders, we involve everyone in the community. Everybody has a role, everyone has a part to play, even if it is to make trouble. It's their role to play. We let them do it. So with the aquaponics project, we start off by our aquaponics build out after we've done some baseline data collection. We also, one of the things we learned is that these things need maintenance, and people need some knowledge of how to fix and troubleshoot. So we do have sessions on, just how to maintain the system, but we also develop like a Facebook group for people to also share and ask questions of us and each other in terms of problems that they might have. We have sessions on La'au Lapa'au, which is our plant-based medicines and our traditional healing methods. So a lot of the plants that we grow are also not just food, but they're also medicine in many cases, as well as aipono, and aipono is Hawaiian for food justice. So we teach a little bit about food justice, food sovereignty, and why it's important to have healthy sourced organic foods available within our communities. We have check-ins, we do a cooking demonstration, we talk story. It's just a way of saying it's a focus group, I guess. A hoike, which is a presentation. A hoike is like like a celebration, end of celebration presentation. Everyone presented their aquaponic, some of the crop that they produced from the aquaponics, and they had a potluck. And then we also did follow-ups with reunions and post measures and additional talk story sessions. So that was essentially the intervention. And so basically, I just want to show some pictures because I think pictures are worth 1,000 words. As you can see, we have our builds going, and as you can see, we have everybody involved. I'm not good with my hands or my tools, but I was in there drilling, hammering, doing stuff. You do stuff you never thought you could do. One of the big things was killing fish. People never killed fish before, So we taught people some humane ways how to source your fish, yeah, some pictures. So that was the build, and here you can see people are getting involved with the installation of these systems in their home, in their backyards. And as you can see, everyone's helping each other out here. Next slide. Our Auntie Luana there in the middle. But as you can see, what we, people are planting their seedlings. And Auntie Luena, she's, one of the wonderful things about our intervention too is that we had built in experts because our kupuna, our elders, remember and they know about our traditions and our medicines. They haven't forgotten, they've kept that knowledge. And so it's so invaluable for people like myself for whom this stuff wasn't really taught to me growing up, you know? It was a period in my lifetime where, we were not necessarily taught to remember, we were taught to forget, and so so valuable to have our elders with us to be able to share some of the things they remember. And that became actually a huge theme of our study was just this idea of remembering and how powerful memories are, especially when things have been lost. For me, one of the things that, one of the results, I remember this one interview, this one woman said, I remember my grandma used to do all this stuff and I didn't realize how brilliant she was, you know. I didn't realize how brilliant my ancestors were. And for people who've been told that their ancestors were not smart and, you know, um, didn't have knowledge, it was that memory was, I think, I don't know, it made it all worthwhile, it made everything worth, made all the hard work worthwhile, just to hear that. Next slide. So here's some of our demonstrations in terms of some of our medicines and such, tinctures, salves, different kinds of medicines that we use for our with our plants. Next slide. And then this is the hoige. We had a tilapia cook-off. Whoever could make the best tilapia recipe was. But as you can see, food is ultimate way to bring people together. As Emma suggested, it is how we sustain our communities, how we sustain ourselves, how we maintain our positive wellness and well-being. So just as sort of some take-home messages, I wish I had my glasses. I'm good. I'll work it. So the aquaponics essentially promotes our healthy eating, fruits, vegetables, as well as traditional foods and as well as fish. A lot of these foods are not, they're not like tilapia is not a traditional fish. Most of our fish are saltwater fish, as you can imagine. We live in Hawaii, we're surrounded by saltwater. We don't have a lot of freshwater fish. A lot of the freshwater fish were actually brought in and tilapia, they took over. We try to also utilize what's available to us in the community and for us even, for example, taro is something that is very key to Native Hawaiians in our food. They don't grow well in aquaponic systems. You really need to have more of a wet, marshy kind of a soil. And when we've tried to grow it in aquaponic systems, it gets small and deformed. And so it's not, we're still working on we're still working on how we can grow our kalo in our backyard. That would be amazing. Right now we cannot, but we do try to incorporate as many of the traditional foods, our traditional medicines. We want to reduce food insecurity. Waimanalo is a food desert, so increasing access to healthy foods. Really, and this is, one of the things we talk about is familial support, it's relationships with one another, with community. It's the attachments that people create through this project that actually I'm like super still attached to those people today, I mean, they're like my family. Even though I haven't worked on the project in a few years, supports community empowerment, social support, a lot of these are social work terms. promote sustainability through ongoing food access, as well as support for these kinds of systems. And then finally, supporting the interconnectedness between land, people, that promote the values that we hold, including pono mea ai, or food justice, and la'ala ba'a, which is our plant-based medicines, which connects not only to our health but to our spirituality. And I think that's it.
Thank you so much, Mike. This is beautiful work. And I also got a chance to go to Hawaii to visit the places that we've been talking about today. So overall, and you just, I think, did a similar summary, but overall, when we're thinking about what is it that these Indigenous knowledges and the projects and programming and experiences that we're offering, what is it that these can offer us about pathways to healing and restoration, to health and well-being, whether we're talking about on an individual level or on a family level, a community level, or even on a global level. And when I think about the development and the project that was shared with us, we can think at the very beginning that there's like assumptions or truths about knowledge, right? People need particular kinds of things. We need physical, intellectual, emotional, spiritual sustenance. So we start with the assumption here in that case. And when we're moving along to design programs or research activities or even policies, we can follow the theoretical thread offered through the Indigenous knowledge or the Indigenous story. Right? If we know that this is something that's true about the world or about human existence, we can then in our very next step begin to design for that. And when you saw what the programming that Mike was sharing about, we saw collaborative design, we saw intergenerational transmission of knowledge and the importance of elders and young people, including the misfits, right? And when we were looking at who is participating in what they're doing in that particular project or design, everybody had a role. And when we think about roles, we're thinking about gifts and proclivities. It's not that everybody is going to have to do exactly the same thing. We all have a particular responsibility in these kinds of community-based projects, or even in the evolution and revolution that needs to take place in terms of how we as a global collective move about in the world. When we look at even something as in healing or teaching and learning strategies, we can see that built within the design are the precepts that we need to teach about science or engineering and agriculture and food sustainability, ecological sustainability. We're talking math, we're talking meeting the needs of people in terms of their physical, intellectual, emotional, spiritual, cultural, linguistic, and local ways. And when we're thinking about on a global level, how is it that we move through and continue to exist in a world within our planetary means? We have ideas for that too, because we have local knowledge systems that are in good relation with the local land and the local waters and the local places. So if we imagine designing our projects, our programming, and our policies for a pluriverse of knowledge, space for heterogeneous or diverse knowledge systems that are localized, then we can think about designing some of these kinds of projects that include the things that we want in terms of scaffolded healing. How do we heal? You go to the School of Social Work and they tell us that trauma heals in the presence of caring others. What is presence then? Can I just sit next to you and call it? What does it mean to be actively present? And what are we talking about when we say embodied participation, hands-on learning? And what I'm trying to get at is when I was a young person, we were raised without running water and electricity up in the mountains on Vancouver Island. And we had all kinds of people coming. They came to babysit, they came to do whatever they did, right? And I just thought that they were coming to be our babysitters. But the truth of the matter is they were running from structural inequality and trauma that was chasing them directly. Some of them were running because they didn't realized that they wouldn't be able to have children because a white researcher sterilized her. Some of them were running because they were aging out of the child welfare system and running away from a step foster parent who was assaulting them. And here I thought they were just coming to be our babysitters. And what happened when they were there? They got into the rhythms of the family. Some people started collecting eggs, some people became the babysitters, some people started helping out with harvesting the deer and the fish and whatnot. Everybody had a role. And I asked my Auntie Kelly and my mom, did you have to yell at all the kids and get them to do it? They were like, no. And it was because of these ideas, right? When you're working in a community, we're not all doing the same things. I'm going to take a look. Mike said he wasn't super good at the whole hands-on drilling and such. I'm going to find somebody who's good at that. Oh, do we need an engineer? I'm going to find the veterans because they just went and spent a whole lot of time training those parts of their brains, way more than me. Right? So there's all of these resources that we all have within our communities. And when I say community, I'm not talking about specifically even Indigenous communities. We have these localized resources that we can draw on that will meet the needs of the people. You hear about, we have all the food and all the resources. I just heard that there was $1 trillion payout to Elon Musk. I had to Google what $1 trillion means. Kaylin?
If you spend $1 million a day for
2,000 years,
1,000
every single day for 2,000 years, you would spend your $1 trillion. You could buy Denmark, Sweden, and the other country next to it, just for kicks. Right? So the rich are getting richer while the rest of us are sitting here wondering what's happening to Mother Earth. And so we have, like all of these different things. And I guess my question about all of this, right? If we take an even bigger step back and we think about the social and the emotional crises that not just young people are facing, but really our global population. How do you reconcile that human beings are the biggest threat to human beings? It's tough, right? And so we go to all these things trying to, we're reaching for these solutions because we know that there's better ways to do things. And we start with land acknowledgements. And we give thanks to the people of this land first and foremost. And then we, because we're existing at the exact same time that our existence is erasing theirs. And right. And so we can do, like, and even in going beyond the land acknowledgements, what does that mean? It means learning about the history. It means learning about the practices. It means learning about the knowledges that have the capacity to save human existence and understanding our role and making sure that that knowledge gets transmitted. And so for me, a bigger question, even in about addressing the socio-emotional landscape that we're currently facing, I want to hear, Mike, your ideas. That whether it's coming from an individual level, when we're talking about scaffolded learning or learning from elders, or the importance of oral transmission of stories, or we're talking about gifts and proclivities. What is it that we need to do now on either an individual level, family level, community level, or global level that can help us move through some of these difficulties? How do we save the world, Mike?
Yeah.
Is the in short.
Would love. Yeah, I wish I knew the answer to honestly. Well, I mean, one of the things that I've become more and more convinced of is that Indigenous knowledges can indeed save the world. I really do believe that, and so I'll give an example of one of the projects that I've worked on in Hawaii where it was a sum that, so I'll start the story by saying there was we did a talk story with our elders, and we asked the elders what are some of the kinds of projects they would want us as researchers to work on. And one of the elders said, we want to return seaweed to our coast. And we were like, wow, you didn't pick something easy, did you? You picked something quite complicated. So we talked about it, we researched it, we brought in seaweed experts from across the islands to come, you know. I don't know if some of you have learned about some of the Pacific navigation that we've been sort of engaged, Native Hawaiians have been engaged in. We just took a canoe around the entire world recently. We're journeying around the entire world, Malama Honua, for to care for the world. So we're very advanced navigators, but today, but we lost that navigation knowledge. We lost it. Hawaii's lost it. And it wasn't until the 70s where we went back to our brothers, our cousins over in Micronesia, where the journeys originally began to the Pacific to learn about our ancient navigation techniques. And that's how we were able to grow and build them today. So we actually lost the knowledge, but we were fortunate. We found experts in Micronesia who could revitalize it for us, you know, which is crazy, right? But this is the kind of thing that, you know, we do. So we brought in, you know, some seaweed experts to tell us what kind of seaweed used to be there, what grows best there, this and that. We developed this intervention where we were restoring an ancient fish pond. That happens to be right where Obama's building his big mansion, but so hopefully he likes our work. But the fish pond there, and we are creating limu leis to wrap around these rocks to place into the fish pond in hopes of growing more seaweed. One of the things that we found in the process of doing the research though was, and it was you know, it was sort of thought that the reason why there's no more seaweed on our coastline is because Native Hawaiian people overpicked that we took all the seaweed and that's why there's no more seaweed. That just runs completely counter to who we are as people, you know, so it seems unlikely, but there's no seaweed, so nobody really knows why there's no seaweed. Once we looked into it, one of the things that we found out was, like in many native communities in Hawaii, water that flows into that valley. Remember I told you about the ahupua'a, how important it is, the top of the mountain? Because that's where your fresh water comes from, right? That water has been diverted from Waimanalo to the other side of the mountain where there's military, used to be plantation crops, now mostly residential housing and tourism. The loss of fresh water flowing into the ocean means a loss of brackish water. So the mixture of salt and fresh and seawater, which is what holds life, right? Without brackish water, there's no seaweed. Without seaweed, there's no small fish. With no small fish, there's no big fish. You have empty coral, rock. So that's an example for me of how, maybe not so much answering your question of how do we save the world, right? But part of it is not just going back to our roots, because that's important, and to seek out knowledge from our cousins and our brothers and our sisters, but also to understand the context that we live in, which is one of colonial dominance, imperialism, capitalism, that takes from our communities without telling us and tells us it's our fault. You know, so part of my job is not just to revitalize. Again, I like the way you said it, Emma. It's not culture. Revitalize who we are. Revitalize who my ancestors dreamed I would be. You know, not there yet. I'm not there yet. Trying, working at it. You know, I try every day to make them proud. But you know, it's the uncovering of not just the revitalizing of who we are, as people, revitalizing the values and the norms that made us healthy and made the environment healthy, but also uncovering the things that have been done to us that are not being told to us and we're being blamed for. That is just as important as it is to revitalize culture. That's social work.
Thank you so much. So I have just a super quick, like when I'm listening to Mike talk, I'm thinking, like in our nation, we have a lot of conversations going on. How do we save the world? What do we do about democracy and so on? And I guess as I'm talking and I'm listening to Mike talk, I'm wanting us to like really dig deeper about trying to think about our role in pushing back against the status quo. Because if we recognize, I went to the School of Social Work, I went over to the School of Law, I went over to the College of Education. And in every department, we're talking about recognizing that we're not doing things right. And most specifically, when you were talking about capitalism, I was thinking about, you know, what are the things that undergird how we move about in the world and even who we think we are. And we can trace the ideals of capitalism back to the Washington Consensus, back to neoliberal and neoconservative ideas about what the world should be like. And those ideals inform every single thing we do currently in the College of Education. And we're saying, wait a second, we need to do a bigger project, a deeper project of understanding what it means to be a human being. And to be human has something to do with living in right and good and true and beautiful relations with the land and the natural world. Because simply we don't exist without the water or the trees. And as it stands, they're currently trying to wholesale Alaska and the Amazon rainforest to the highest bidder. I don't think that's in alignment with most of our goals, right? So when we're thinking about even our broader projects or our contributions to the after-school program or our contributions to global and public and health development, when we're thinking about all these things, we need to take it to a bigger conversation about what it means to be human, because even the conversation about democracy doesn't include the plants or the animals or the natural world. What if I said we needed to be fighting for socio-ecological and just democracies for all living beings? Would that be a different outcome? Would that be a different metric? And if we were in schools, what would the metric be? And we were talking about and writing down on our pieces of paper the kinds of things that you're looking at, right? The kinds of things, whether it's teachings, right? These are theories. These are theories about what it means to be a person, those teachings that we were talking about. So we're wanting to draw some of these things out, but I do want to make space for you to offer your thoughts on some of the things that came up for you. Or to ask questions of us, what we're thinking about Indigenous knowledge systems and what does Indigenous food systems have to do with well-being, human well-being, individual well-being, and planetary well-being.
You look like you got a lot to say. I want to hear what you have to say.
I'm trying to, sorry, I struggle with the question because my mind jumps everywhere. I guess just for traditional and indigenous communities like the diaspora, like, sorry. I'm just thinking about how food pathways can help solve like that feeling of like loss or like culture. And I was just wondering if there was anything more about that with like the aquaponic system. I don't know.
Yeah, you want me to answer that?
Yeah, let's hear about the aquaponics, and if that anything came up, I can offer a couple thoughts too.
I mean, I would say, a lot of it came when we talked about the medicines. You know, when we did the unit on medicines, I thought that was really impressive. But you know, the process, even the process in and of itself, right? Like we told people, you're not building your own aquaponics system. We're all building our, you know, it's a minor point, but it's really different, right? Than sort of the individualism of Western culture, right? Western culture is you get your own, you do your own, you take your own, and you want yours to be the best, right? You don't care about anybody else's being good. You want yours to be the best. That's Western individualism. Switching that notion, right? It really goes back to the core values of relations, of community, of attachment, you know? Everybody watches each other's kids is another rule we have. Nobody is one person's kid. You're all my kids today. And we're all here to take care of each other, right? These are small things. But when you're put in a situation that is so counter to individual Western culture, you almost can't help but fall back into that, oh, this is how we're supposed to live, right? This is how we're supposed to be. This is how we were, you know, and so it does conjure up, you know, even the process itself, right? Conjures up these ideas of community and wellness. So yeah, I want Emma to be able to answer some of that question.
Oh, fun. Thank you for the question. So just thinking about the loss, like what kinds of things are, you know, coming back or emerging for the community in relation to participating in the actual activities, for example, and thinking about and designing for that on purpose. When I think about the loss of culture, I go to two different stories. And so I'm going to share a little bit of magic. Maybe it's a little bit of spirit. But my brother Troy was hunting with my late stepdad, Joe, and they shot a deer. And when you shoot deer, you need to shoot them in the shoulder at a certain particular spot. It's not just anywhere you get the deer, in order to ethically harvest the deer. And at this particular time, the deer didn't go down, so they had to follow the deer. And they followed the deer for a good handful of minutes. And when they finally found the deer was standing upstream, chewing on burdock and tending to the bullet wound. And burdock is an indigenous plant medicine, which you might think is a weed, but actually it has lots of medicinal properties. So that was really interesting to me. And that says something to me about the nature of knowledge, where it's contained and how it's transmitted. And in another story, my mom was invited to Belize with a whole bunch of other medicine people from around North and South America. And every single day, if you know my mom, she'll just roll on in. She's singing songs, she's loud. She might even do a front snap kick every so often. And she never knew where these songs came from, but they seem like they were in our language. And today when she shares her story, because she's not a speaker of our language, she shared it with another elder in our community who told her that these were dialects coming from three surrounding communities in the area. And so this is what my mom usually sees. But this one morning, she went up to the top of the pyramids in Belize to sing her songs and to offer her prayers. And she was pissed because there was a different song in her heart, a different song in her mind, and she couldn't get it out. And she kept saying, oh, geez, just, right. She just wanted to do her thing and her prayers and whatnot. And she held it all in. And later that morning, they were sitting in circle with all the medicine people, and the song came out. And one of the medicine people was really, really angry because that song had been buried with his grandmother 50 years earlier. And it was from South America. And so I don't know what that means, but it's a bit magic and it's a bit spirit, right? When I was sad because my dad passed away in 1987, I said, I want all of his writings. I need them. I want to see what he was writing about and thinking about. And my late uncle Robert said, It's already in you, baby girl. It's already there. It's in your DNA. And my late John Trudell has an entire CD about it's in your DNA. Right? So I don't know everything about the nature of knowledge. In fact, I know really, really just a super, super duper small bit about something in particular. But what I do know is that if we continue to cultivate the world that we want and to live the lives that we want, to focus on that, not to focus on how do we prevent our young people from dying, but how do we create relational ecosystems so that we all understand what it means to live. 1 minute to spare. Any thoughts? What's coming up for folks?
Oh, it's just about 3.
And by the way, that was a really good question for someone who doesn't really have questions. That's a great one. Do we have time to talk more?
Yeah, I have time for one more.
Talked a little bit about the focus groups and how you called it Talk Story. How'd you like come up with that name and like kind of incorporate the culture of, instead of saying focus group? Because I know a lot of
Yeah,
people can get intimidated by calling it a focus group.
yeah, we call it talk story because that's what people call it in Hawaii. I mean, when you ever, it's kind of like, oh, what you do last night, oh, we just talk story. That means we just hung out and had conversation, right? We just talk. So it's a familiar term. People are very familiar with it. It's a local term, and so again, just kind of using terminology that people feel very comfortable with. We really try. In fact, one of the first things we did before we even started a research, the first thing we did was we did a research 101 workshop, just to let people know what is it that we're trying to do when we do research, and to train them to be researchers. We tell them you're a researcher now. You're co-researching with us. You have as much expertise as we do on this. So sometimes even our communities come up with the terms. They're like, oh, we can't call it that. We have to call it something better than that. So yeah, it's oftentimes it's just picking terms that people are familiar with, people are comfortable with, so they don't feel like they're being studied, so to speak,
And the theory behind Talk Story would be stories. I mean, we've already been talking about how stories are transmitted intergenerationally and how stories help us co-construct knowledge. So there's a lot about stories. I mean, if you're a social worker, we can ask somebody to tell us about their trauma story. And then we ask them to tell us again and again and again within the context of a caring other. And that's how there are parts and aspects and theories about what's happening in that caring relationship, right? And when we think about identity development, if you go to any of our elders in my community about really anything, it would always boil back down to what it means to be Homo. And to me, that's again that idea about what it means to be human, right? To live in right and good, right relations with the natural world. So when I think about stories, I think about knowledge construction, I think about identity development, and I think about the ability to heal from trauma, especially across generations and even on global levels. Through stories and talk stories, right? It wasn't, I mean, they all just sat around and were shooting shit, right? Like, that's really how it rolled.
You could call it that too.
Yeah. But there are deep things that are taking place when I tell you a story about who I am, or what the world means to me, or what you mean to me, or even my children. You're getting, there are lots of different kinds of things that are taking place physiologically, socially, emotionally, culturally, etc., that are continuing to contribute to different kinds of possibilities for the future through every single interaction.
And also too, I've come to notice a lot of Native people are storytellers and quite good storytellers, and I'm also a storyteller, and I do think that it comes from having like an oral tradition, I mean, that's how our stories were all passed down, they're passed down to generations. But the stories it's interesting because for example, you all ever hear of Pele, the fire goddess who lives in the volcanoes and stuff, where so in Hawaii, there's a goddess called Pele. She lives in Kilauea currently, Kilauea, the active volcano. But the story is that Pele moved from island to island and created the islands along the way. And you know, what's interesting is when you look at our chants, our stories of Pele, they are a perfect chronology of the eruptions that occurred over the history of time in Hawaii. And the formation and the order of the formation of the islands. So this was known knowledge, you know, and was perpetuated to us through stories of the goddess Pele. So to think of these stories as just myths, stories, they're more than that. They're documentation of historical accounts that are put into a story or a metaphor to not only share to keep the knowledge, but to also kind of give us some lessons along the way, you know, about life and what it means to be human.
Yeah, thank you. And obviously we can go on and on and on. Stories, especially creation stories, serve as governance structures with agency and consent and reciprocity and these kinds of things embedded within them. And we could probably talk for days about that too. But Haitsap Kasiyam Natsiaya, thank you all so much for joining us in person as well as online. And we give thanks to those of you who are able to stick around for an extra few minutes. We'll be here as well if anybody has any follow-up thoughts or questions. Haitsap.
If anybody wants to try, there's those berries on the arrangement are both edible.
Wow.
Yeah.
They
The-
look
the
so
little-
ornamental.
The little one is high bush cranberry, native here. Indigenous here, they taste a little bit like stalks, some people think, so you decide whether you like it or not. And then the
Fox.
that's what some people say, but or smell maybe more like it. It's sour, they're sour.
It's unique taste. Maybe it'll be better with